One is Not Born a Woman by Monique Wittig, Part 3. For women, Marxism had two results. It prevented them from being aware that they are a class and therefore from constituting themselves as a class for a very long time by leaving the relation women/men outside of the social order, by turning it into a natural relation, doubtless for Marxists the only one, along with the relation of mothers to children, to be seen this way, and by hiding the class conflict between men and women behind the natural division of labor, the German ideology. This concerns the theoretical / ideological level. On the practical level, Lenin, the party, all the communist parties up to now, including all the most radical political groups, have always reacted to any attempt on the part of women to reflect and form groups based on their own class problem with an accusation of divisiveness. By uniting, we women are dividing the strength of the people. This means that for the Marxist, women belong either to the bourgeoisie class or to the proletariat class. In other words, to the men of these classes. In addition, Marxist theory does not allow women any more than other classes of oppressed people to constitute themselves as historical subjects, because Marxism does not take into account the fact that a class also consists of individuals one by one. Class consciousness is not enough. We must try to understand philosophically, which means politically, these concepts of subject and class consciousness and how they work in relation to our history. When we discover that women are the objects of oppression and appropriation, at that very moment that we have become able to perceive this, we become subjects in the sense of cognitive subjects through an operation of extraction. Consciousness of oppression is not only a reaction to fight against oppression, it is also the whole conceptual reevaluation of the social world. Its whole reorganization with new concepts from the point of view of oppression is what I like to call the silence of oppression created by the oppressed. The operation of understanding reality has to be undertaken by every one of us. Call it a subjective cognitive practice. The movement back and forth between the levels of reality, the conceptual reality and the material reality of oppression, which are both social realities, is accomplished through this change. It is we who historically must undertake the task of defining the individual subject in materialist terms. This certainly seems to be an impossibility, since materialism and subjectivity have always been mutually exclusive. Nevertheless, and rather than despairing of ever understanding, we must recognize the need to reach subjectivity and the abandonment by many of us to the myth woman. The myth of woman being only a snare that holds us up. This real necessity for anyone to exist as an individual as well as a member of a class is perhaps the first condition for the accomplishment. This real necessity for everyone to exist as an individual as well as a member of a class is perhaps the first condition for the accomplishment of a revolution, without which there can be no real fight or transformation. But the opposite is also true. Without class and class consciousness, there are no real subjects, only alienated individuals. For a woman to answer the question of the individual subject in materialist terms is first to show, as the lesbians and feminists did, that supposedly subjective, individual, private problems are in fact social problems, class problems, that sexuality is not for women an individual and subjective expression, but a social institution of violence. But once we have shown that all so-called personal problems are in fact class problems, we will still be left with the question of the subject of each singular woman, not the myth, but each one of us. At this point, let us say that a new personal and subjective definition for all humankind can only be found beyond the categories of sex, woman and man, and the advent of individual subjects demands first destroying the categories of sex, ending the use of them, and rejecting all sciences which still use these categories as their fundamentals, which is practically all sciences. To destroy women does not mean that we aim, short of physical destruction, to destroy lesbianism simultaneously with the categories of sex, because lesbianism provides for the moment the only social form in which we can live freely. Lesbian is the only concept I know which is beyond the categories of sex, woman, and man, because the designated subject, lesbian, is not a woman, either economically or politically or ideologically. For what makes a woman is a specific social relationship, a social relation to a man, a relation that we have previously called servitude, a relation which implies personal and physical obligation as well as economic obligation, forced residence, domestic corvée, conjugal duties, unlimited production of children, etc. A relation which lesbians escape by refusing to become or stay heterosexual. We are escapees from our class in the same way as the American runaway slaves were when escaping slavery and becoming free. For this is an absolute necessity. Our survival demands that we contribute all our strength to the destruction of the class of women within which men appropriate woman. This can be accomplished only by the destruction of heterosexuality as a social system, which is based on the oppression of women by men and which produces the doctrine of the difference between the sexes to justify this oppression.